and then check the YouTube. And maybe refresh the page. You should start seeing it's like the end.
Okay, we're live now. We can start.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good luck. It's like I'm gonna close the door, so
Okay.
it's like you should not have any problems. I'm gonna be nearby, so if you have problems.
Okay. Hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the Defeating Epilepsy YouTube channel. My name is Natalie Boyum, and I'm the president and founder of the Defeating Epilepsy Foundation. We're a 501c3 not-for-profit, and our mission is to provide the advocacy and educational resources needed to the epilepsy community in our society. I'd like to introduce Pauline, who's going to be our moderator for the event, and our guest today is Dr. Ian Bone. Dr. Bone is the author of Sacred Lives, an account of the history, cultural association, and social impact for epilepsy. Dr. Bone is a retired neurologist and has a son who is battling epilepsy. Thank you, Dr. Bone, for being our guest today.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I would say thank you always for, being here and helping us, Dr. Bone. Just as I held up earlier, this is Dr. Bone's book, The Sacred Lives, and I've just started to read it, and I have to say it contains a lot of wonderful information. So if you're interested in purchasing it, you can go to smileamazon.com and choose the Defeating Epilepsy Foundation of the charity of your choice, and a percentage will be donated to people who are battling epilepsy, and we will have the link in our comment question section below. So, Dr. Bone, can you briefly explain to everybody why you decided to write your book?
I think there were three reasons, sadly. First of all, I've been since 1978 a neurologist. My specialty wasn't epilepsy, I was a stroke neurologist, but I saw patients with epilepsy. And I was very aware when I started off that there weren't many drugs, there weren't many treatments, but with the passage of time that changed very dramatically, and more things became available. But what didn't seem to change was the public's perception of epilepsy, the stigma attached to it, and the fact that a lot of people with epilepsy hid their condition from others. That was one reason that I embarked the book, to try and find out where the stigma came from, and was there any prospect of it going away. The next reason, as you mentioned, is that I had a child with epilepsy, and I was aware as a parent of how difficult it was to manage certain situations, and trying to straddle that area between overprotective and underprotective, knowing what was the right thing to do. And the third reason was that I became, after I retired, in charge of governance at the William Corrie and Scottish Epilepsy Centre that investigates people with difficult epilepsies. And the book was written with a view to educating the wider public, but also to raise funds for the William Corrie Centre, where all the royalties go to.
That's amazing. So in reading through your book, there were a few subjects that I found that were quite interesting that I wanted to discuss for our viewers today. And the first one, I was reading all the way back to the earlier historical times of epilepsy, and was reading about Joan of Arc, who they thought had ecstatic epilepsy due to visual and auditorial hallucinations, thinking she was talking to angels. Can you explain to others, how it affected her, and possibly why having these visions and hallucinations could have resulted in her being executed?
I think it's very difficult historically to confirm whether anybody had a medical condition. You're dealing with a lack of any medical evidence. You're dealing on, for instance, in Joan of Arc's case, the transcript of her trial. She was tried at the age of 19 and she was burnt at the stake. From the age of 13, she had experienced visual images and she'd heard voices. And the voices were a mixture of God telling her to go out and basically conquer the English, and the visions were visions apparently of the deity. Now, Cases have been made by many people that what she had was epilepsy. Other people are less. The truth of the matter is we'll never know with any degree of certainty. But she's always been put down on various websites as a famous person with epilepsy. A lot of people, often religious leaders, have been deemed to have epilepsy. To go to one extreme, the Prophet Muhammad, by some is believed to have epilepsy. John the Baptist, St. Paul was believed to have epilepsy. Anne Lee, the founder of the Shakers. John Smith, founder of the Mormons. But when you drill down on the evidence for all of this is very slight and very scant. We now know nowadays in the modern era it is often quite difficult to make a diagnosis of epilepsy. So you can imagine how difficult it is to confirm a diagnosis of epilepsy in a historical individual on the basis of very little evidence. So I think the best thing to say about Joan of Arc is there will always be uncertainty.
Oh, absolutely. It's just very interesting how all these people you mentioned, because of certain characteristics or certain behaviors, there's a chance that they did have it. But at the same time, you're absolutely right. Due to lack of DNA, we really don't know. And
we don't know. And in Joan of Arc, she was not just burned once, but twice. And her ashes were swept into the River Seine. So there's no chance of getting any DNA there to know what she did or did not have.
Oh wow, now that I didn't know. So no, there is no way, but it just shows, the negative history that has followed this condition.
That's right. When you go back to the title of the book is Sacred Life, the reason for that is that in Greek and Roman times, people with epilepsy were felt to be sacred. They were regarded by society often as being people of genius. And that has changed with the passage of time quite dramatically. During the Reformation, people with epilepsy were persecuted. They were treated as witches or warlocks. During the 18th and early part of the 19th century, people with epilepsy were incarcerated in prisons and workhouses.
Pauline, do we have any comments or questions so far?
We don't have any of them from our YouTube live, but we have a few from the social media posts that we had put. So for the viewers, so thank you so much for joining us again. And so like you might be following our social media pages, you might be aware that accept questions that you would like to ask Dr. Bone. So following that, we do have a few questions, but most of those are about how to deal with a person who has epilepsy, or people who are not very aware of what the situation is. Like people think we have a few questions that says where people think that it is not a very common illness, it's very rare. Or we also have some questions that go like if somebody is having a seizure, what do I try to restrain them, try to control them, would that help them? Or all the seizures they have epilepsy. So the bigger problem is I think people are not aware. People including me, we might not be aware of the intensity and the kind of help that needs for people of epilepsy, how to take care of them, how to respect them, how to give them equal chances. So those are the kind of myths that we hear from the public.
No, and that's very true. I find even though through my work in here we are in the 21st century, that so many people still do not understand what epilepsy is. I think the biggest challenge I can say myself on a personal basis as an entrepreneur, there's many people in the business field who second out, do I have the capability of being a business person? Do I have the capability of having a job? And how am I able to even function? And I think that's a lot of what we just still see is the lack of education. And that's why when it comes to my work, I'm not just trying to educate people with epilepsy. I'm stepping out of the comfort zone, and we must start working with people who are able-bodied. We must start working with entrepreneurs. We must start working with people in law enforcement to educate them about epilepsy, because until the rest of society really understands what it is, we're not going to get rid of the stigma. We're not going to get better educational, economic opportunities for people with epilepsy, because if it's not known, how can we make decisions on helping these people have a better quality of life?
Absolutely. I read a quote somewhere that says the biggest illness, sickness that people suffer from is ignorance. That's probably the biggest illness people suffer from. And I think today's life, even if it helps a few people understand, I think it's going to create a very drastic change in our society. And this life is aimed at that. So if you guys have any questions at all, anything that you'd like to clarify, please do leave it in the comment section. We're going to keep checking it and we'll get to it. And please keep watching. If you know someone with whom you can share this video, someone you think will like this, please do share the link, and please stay with us throughout. Over to you, Natalie.
Thank you. What are your thoughts, Dr. Bone, on what you're hearing from people's curiosities of when it comes to taking care of people with epilepsy, or what it's like to live with it? How rare is it? What do you find your experience has been with those questions?
I think the first thing trying to educate on what epilepsy is that most people have the concept that epilepsy is a disease. Epilepsy is a symptom of many diseases. And that you can have a stroke of epilepsy, you can have a birth injury of epilepsy, you can have a head injury of epilepsy, you can have nothing wrong with you, no injury known, and yet epilepsy may just arise out of the blue with no known reason. So firstly, there are many causes, and that's the first message to get across. The second message is there are many different forms. And when you mention how you deal with somebody if you come across them with a seizure, if they're having a major tonic-clonic seizure, you put them in the recovery position. You protect their airway. You make sure that they don't swallow their tongue, they don't vomit. If they're having what's called a complex partial seizure, this usually manifests itself as some form of behavior that doesn't look normal. Somebody might be wandering around. They might be scratching their head. They might be staring. They might be smacking their lips. And the thing in complex partial seizures is not to get hold of someone and try and restrain them, because they're in a state where they're easily confused, and they might misinterpret restraint as being an attempt to manhandle them and strike out. So there are different ways of managing different types. One thing to mention is in the book is that there was a study done on how epilepsy was treated in medical soaps on television, on Chicago Hope, I think, private practice, on ER, and I think it was Doctor, I can't remember the other one. But anyhow, there were 4 different television series, and they found that in over 50% of situations where epilepsy was depicted, the doctors or the nurses were actually providing first aid in a manner that should have been provided. And there you're losing a huge educational opportunity to show on television how you actually help somebody when they're having a tonic or a complex partial seizure.
No, and that's very true, and I think a lot of things is people really don't understand what to look out for, because you said there's so many different types of seizures, and the one that I think greatly concerns me the most when it comes to being in public and seeing something is a complex partial. Myself, that's what I've had for many years, and I'm trying to explain to people that I come off as conscious, but I'm not conscious. Many people look at me in a confused state as, how could something like that happen? And I said the best way I can describe it is, I come off looking high or drunk and I can't communicate. Now, because I don't remember them, if someone were to touch me, I honestly don't know if I would become combative. But when I had a seizure in school my last semester, it scared me so much because they did assume I was under the influence. It really gave me the strength to go back to my neurologist at the time and say, enough is enough. And it was more out of fear of anything, as if something like this happens in public again. Am I going to be arrested forget, am I going to get medical help? Is someone not going to understand what's going on, and I'm going to wake up in the holding center?
Yes. I think the issue of arrest and being thought to be behaving disorderly in public is a very common problem. And sadly, a lot of people with epilepsy are arrested and put through the legal system. Now, I don't know what the legal system is like in America, but if that happened in the United Kingdom, you would spend anything between 8 months and 12 months before your case came up in court. During which time you would have anxiety, knowing you were being charged and you could face a fine or even imprisonment. Often defense lawyers, because they feel it's in the client's best interest, will say, well, just plead guilty, get it out of the way, move on. But of course, if it recurs and you plead guilty the first time, the second time it happens, it's custodial sentence. So I think there's a lot that has been done to educate police in seizures and to recognise other things like diabetic hypoglycemia. I think there's been a lot done to educate police in understanding when they come across somebody behaving unusually, it could be epilepsy. But it's very difficult to keep that at the forefront of the policeman's mind when they're dealing with somebody behaving in an odd way in public.
Oh, absolutely. And I hope in time, that's things that our supporters and others will help us educate society and law enforcement and others about, so that we can prevent these unnecessary situations. I'm currently working with local deputy sheriffs in our area with the goal of just that. And what I was very happy about in talking with law enforcement, as I have been, they're not defensive or upset. They actually want to learn, because the way I've explained it to them is, I understand, yes, this could be traumatic for someone battling epilepsy, but it could be just as traumatic for the police officer who is facing the situation. So, education is not going to just help people with epilepsy, but it can help, officers who are in that situation prevent any unnecessary trauma for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, the next question we were talking about was related to the medical field and understanding epilepsy. And in part of your book, I read about a doctor. His name was Dr. Abu Qasim, and he thought that criminality was linked to epilepsy. And he developed the term furor epilepticus, linking epilepsy with criminal behavior. And I just want to know your thoughts on this, because just as we said, when people being arrested, some people might have the perception that we're naturally criminals, and how can we explain to people that that's not the case?
I think, and again, this is historical. If you go back in time, the first criminologists actually defined certain crimes as being crimes that looked as though they were performed by somebody out of control because of their epilepsy. And there was an English psychiatrist called Henry Maudsley, who way back, maybe 80, 90, 100 years ago, said if you see a crime that has no explanation, that is violent, then look for the epileptic. That was his comment. So there was this belief that epilepsy was associated with criminality. Thankfully, as time has gone by, and they've been started looking at prison populations, and there is no evidence that the incidence of epilepsy within the criminal community, within prison, is higher than the incidence of epilepsy in the general population. So that means that people with epilepsy are not more likely to end up in prison unless their social circumstances, the consequence of their epilepsy, have led them to a certain point in life where they are in despair and have little in the way of opportunity. But in truth, there is no increased tendency to criminality amongst people with epilepsy. Again, it reflects stigma, it reflects fear, it reflects the fact that in historical times, people with epilepsy did find themselves in prison and in poorhouses because there was nowhere else for them to go. There were no drugs for epilepsy, there was no surgery for epilepsy. So people with epilepsy were ostracized by society. There was no place for them. So they would find themselves incarcerated in asylums, in poor law hospitals. Thankfully, that is history now, because we have drugs, we have surgery, things are so much different. But the consequence of that Victorian attitude, Dickensian attitude to epilepsy, is that stigma persists today as, if you like, a legacy of the way people viewed epilepsy in the past.
That's very interesting, and I find it interesting how you brought up the asylums. It always bothered me to think that, that was the only place for people to go, and that was the case for the U.S. for many years until I think it was the late 70s going into the early 80s. The Reagan administration closed a lot of the asylums. But in doing my own research, mainly out of curiosity, I found a number of research articles that described people who did not show any tendency as being psychotic or epileptic, but still were placed in asylums because they honestly didn't know what to do with them. So even though they were of sound mind, they were still kept in asylums to be off the streets.
One of the great pioneers of this was an American entrepreneur, William Letchworth. And Letchworth toured Europe in the 1890s, early 1900s, looking at the way that epilepsy was treated there. And in Europe, this was the beginning of the colony movement. Again, no drugs, no surgery, but looking for a community in which people with poorly controlled epilepsy could live. And Letchworth came back to the States and he opened Craig Colony in New York, which was the very first, if you like, specialized epilepsy center, taking people out of the asylum and putting them into wards. And that was really the beginning of the North American epilepsy movement.
Oh, very interesting. What year was that again that he did that?
Letchworth, I think, was around 1890, and Craig Colony, and it was William Sprackling who was the first epileptologist, I think, really, a doctor who worked at Craig Colony, who wrote one of the great classic books on the management of epilepsy. And by then, drug treatments were beginning to appear. Bromide appeared as probably the very first drug to be used in treating epilepsy.
Oh, very interesting. Pauline, do we have any comments or questions to go over?
No, but I can ask you a question from the social media pages that we did get. So that was a question about how probably Dr. Bone or you can answer from your perspective. So it was about how if there was any difference between how people have accepted people with epilepsy itself through the years. So probably like Dr. Bone had mentioned in his book about how the condition was during the Joan of Arc period. But even like if we say 20 years back, 30 years back. So how has been the acceptance through these years? Has it improved? Or do people still have stuck stigma in their head that has through the decades? Because like you had just said, in terms of medicine and all that, there's been improvement, which is great. But what about the society that we live in, about the people's mentality? How do you see it, Dr. Bone? And
I mean, there've been lots of surveys looking at this, asking people questions like, would you like your son or daughter to marry someone with epilepsy? Would you like to work in the workplace alongside someone with epilepsy? Would you like your doctor to have epilepsy or your school teacher to have epilepsy? And whereas the trend has gradually been towards an acceptance, and more people saying, yes, I'm not worried about that, there is still a significant number of people who are. I think in the employment area, it's particularly difficult because you are protected by disability discrimination acts in the United Kingdom. If you're in a job and you develop epilepsy, you're very well protected. Adjustments have to be made to ensure that you continue doing your job. But if you then leave that job and apply for another job, that's where the problem arises, because you then have to declare your epilepsy on your application form, or else conceal it and run the risk if something happens of being dismissed for being untruthful. Now, your new employer will think, well, I'm interviewing these 10 people, and there's one of them here that I'm going to have to make adjustments in the workplace to accommodate them. And frankly, that's not in my best financial interest to do that. There are quotas, there are disability quotas in the UK for certain workforces. How many people in your workforce should suffer from or be living with a disability? But those quotas only refer to large firms. So I think in employment it's still an issue. It's still an issue in the United Kingdom with respect to going into the armed services. It's still an issue with acceptance into the police force. There are still problems, but things are an awful lot better than they were when I started out 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah. I can say from a patient perspective, even though I still face a high level of stigma and discrimination, I find when it comes to stigma and discrimination, it depends where you are. I found when I was living in more of a progressive area, when I was in Buffalo, we had the University of Buffalo, we had a lot of research going on. Because there were so many doctors in the community involved with these things, I think there was a little bit of more of an acceptance. I think where people felt the fear, or at least I can say from my personal experience, is when it started getting into employment. Even though we have the Americans with Disabilities Act and epilepsy is protected by it, a lot of employers will try to get around it. Let's say you have a seizure on the job. They can't fire you, but all of a sudden, well, I need a reliable worker. Well, I have to have you do this, and now, because I have to make accommodations, I can't, you're not going to be able to handle this because it has to be done this way, so I can't keep you here if you can't follow, the requirements of your position. So a lot of people, including myself, for many years, I hid that I had epilepsy, and what the trigger that I had, or I had, was I would have a horrible migraine. Well, I would just call off of work, say I have a migraine, I can't drive, sorry, I'll be in tomorrow, take my rescue medication, and went to sleep. I never told the person I was calling into, I've been throughout the early hours of the morning in pain and I'm having auras. I can't get in the car because I might seize. I wouldn't have had a job. The excuse would have been, well, we don't know you can get to the job safely. I think where it comes to other things like education, we are seeing changes in education. I'm really happy to see with our scholarship program, more students are applying to college and more students are getting the confidence to go, where 20 years ago, it was so sad to say, but I was considered special. And I never thought of myself as special. I was just like every other person who wanted higher education. But at the same time, because of the stigma, a lot of people with my condition were actually discouraged from higher education. When the last year I was in college, my former neurologist, because I was having seizures, they were out of control and I lost my license, wanted me to stop going to school and get disability. And I made it clear I wasn't. I was finishing school. And he became frustrated with me one day and said, why can't you be a good girl and just go on disability? And, I look back now, I wish I could go back in time and I, rather than being angry with him, would have been simple. I can't be a good girl. I have to be a survivor. And I think a lot of people, when they feel the lack of support from families, from their physicians, from society in general, that's when you see them giving up and then all of a sudden, well, I guess I have no choice. I have to go on disability. Who would want to hire me? How am I capable of doing this? I think it really just tears apart on people's self-confidence, and we have to start working on these things so that people can get past it and start being productive in society. How do you feel it's been like that in the United Kingdom, Dr. Bone, when it comes to things like educational opportunities or having the support of your neurologist?
I think again, they're an awful lot better, but within my lifetime, I remember a young boy who couldn't get into teacher training school to become a school teacher because of his epilepsy. I remember a nurse who, when she had a student nurse having a seizure in the operating theatre and being found out that she hadn't cared for epilepsy before going on the nursing course. I mean, I think of a catalogue of cases over the years where people have had terrible experiences as a consequence of people's attitudes towards their epilepsy. I think it's changed. I think it is better, but it's still there. And I think the biggest problem is the fear that people have about epilepsy. I mean, when you speak to people, I think it's something like one in three of us in our lifetime will see a tonic seizure out on the street, on a bus, in a theatre somewhere. And the response that most people have when they see a seizure, having never seen one before, is one of fear. And I can speak here from personal experience, because I was 10 when I first saw a seizure in cinema. And I still remember it. It's vivid in my mind. I even remember the film we were watching at the time. I remember it so vividly. So the fear, a lot of the fear of epilepsy comes from the actual surprise and alarm at seeing an attack. And how do you get over that? And how do you tell the public that there is no need for that fear? How do you cope with that? It's so difficult.
It is. It's very difficult. And I just remembered something you brought up I also wanted to reply on. You talked about the protections of people more with epilepsy now in the workforce and the requirements that they have to follow, and it's more the larger companies and small businesses. But that's another thing that I've talked to people about. Over here, we're researching more and more about DEI and the people who fall under these guidelines to help diversify and not to exclude, and just to innovate, companies to expand and be more diverse for not just disabilities and differences, but also to, the LGBTQ, people of color, people of minority ethnicities, many things that, fall under it. And I find these multinational businesses that are running out of America have phenomenal benefits for these people. They have great HR teams. They really have put together knowing that if they want to keep an image and move forward and continue to grow, they have to adapt to these things. There's no getting around it. But at the same time, myself being surrounded by a lot of small business owners, I try to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion with them. I try to talk about things of the importance of if they want to grow, they have to make accommodations not to fear people with disabilities and differences. And I find the attitude is a lot of them don't even want to learn, at least in my experience in my community, which is just, it's so disappointing. I had a small business owner say to me one time when I was at a chamber event, he goes, you come off as so smart, but I would never hire you. And I said, well, I appreciate your honesty in that. Can I ask why? He goes, what if you had a seizure in my office and fell and got hurt? I don't want you suing me for your injuries. What if you have a seizure in front of one of my clients? I'm not losing my business because you scare my clients away. And I said, well, the probability of that happening is little to none. But in a situation, let's say you need an accountant and you wanted to hire me to do your accounting or your data entry. You don't have to have me there at the office for a position like that. I could work from home. I can do my work and send it to you through Dropbox and other resources. We could meet once a week on Zoom and follow up. I don't even need to come into the office with the advancements we have in technology now. So you can grow your company and diversify, but at the same time, protect yourself, protect your company, and the others around. There are solutions to it now. And when I explained it, the look he had on his face, I don't think he even understood how he could do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what one of the biggest problems is. It's going to be educating people.
It's educating people. I think the problem with educating people, and you look at all the educational programs, there was a paper recently on stigma and stigma interventions. And it looked at, an enormous amount of work that had been done over the years. But the problem with the stigma interventions is that you teach a group of people about epilepsy, and they go away, and then do you have to repeat that talk to them? How often does the information that you've given them remain with them? Education is a continuous thing, and just giving brief courses of a day or two on various stigma interventions, does that work? It's so difficult, really. It's so difficult.
No, it is, and I find it comes down to the area people are working in, one, but also it comes down to the individual. Do they want to learn? So, you can have, I find you can have all the certifications or daily conferences or webinars. And I think the average person does want to know so that they can grow. But I think if there's also people who are very set in their ways that, oh, I don't want people who are different than me around me, to change somebody who has that negativity, it's very, very challenging.
Yes.
How are we doing, Pauline? Are there any more questions?
We don't have any as of now. But I will keep checking.
Okay.
And I will.
Well, I know the third subject that I wanted to bring up, we've been talking about, the workforce, hiding conditions. And there was a part in your book on page 200 when I read about Kurt Eichenwald, who was a journalist. I think he still is actually with the New York Times. And he made a comment about our current president, and someone sent him a GIF with a strobe light image with the words, "You deserve a seizure for your post." And this person who sent this image severely hurt this journalist, and I think people need to understand the severity of what they could do to somebody doing such a mean thing to somebody. Can you enlighten our supporters, Dr. Bone, on a situation like this?
I think there's the potential for social media to be extremely cruel, obviously, and to kind of harm people with conditions, with people who are different. One thing I learned through doing the book, though, when I finished doing the book, to try and promote it, I went onto Twitter, which is something that I never thought I would do. And I am amazed at the amount of information, support, help, and positivity there is for the epilepsy community on Twitter. I think you see people describing themselves as epilepsy warriors, people who will tweet to say, I haven't had a seizure for a week, and other people will reply with their thumbs up and keep going. I think there's a tremendous amount of support and potential for the good, to be positive on social media. But I accept that story that you're mentioning is an example of how social media can be so bad and so harmful and so demoralizing for someone with a condition like epilepsy. Yes.
Oh, absolutely. And I find the same experience I've had, and I find it depends on really what social media sources. When I first set up our channels, honestly, Twitter was something I didn't think was going to really grow or be serious. I thought, okay, we're sending out tweets here and there, we'll get somebody's attention. But I have to say, it's our Twitter channel has grown to many different levels, and probably it's the most active when it comes to people sharing stories with our organization, asking questions, reaching out. Many of the people who are following us on Twitter, they know that I have epilepsy, and them also giving me words of encouragement as I go on this journey. And very similar to things like, I find Instagram and Twitter have been some of the most supportive when it comes to personal. And the one that I was hesitant to create, but I knew it was a necessity, was when I created our LinkedIn channel. A lot of doctors, a lot of other professionals have followed us. They're not always as interactive due to their work schedule, but I've had doctors message me and say, what you're doing is great, please don't stop. And it's a great feeling to hear that from others. I have to say the only one that I have to say I feel has been very negative, and I for a short time tried using it, but I refuse to use it now, is TikTok. And the reason I chose not to do it, at first I thought, well, the younger generation is on there. Can I use this as an educational source to get, across to the late teens, early 20s crowd? At the same time, seeing the unethical actions a company that owns TikTok has done, such as taking data they're not supposed to. There's a lot of bad things about it, sadly, but also what bothered me was some of the things they were allowing to be on their channel, such as these seizure dares, or the people mimicking that they were having seizures, and what was it? Seizure challenge they were calling it. I was trying to remember the word. And to see people faking seizures and laughing, I found it so disappointing that they would allow something so tasteless to stay on their channel, knowing that, it shows right there that lack of education and ignorance. And what would these people do if they actually saw a real one?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
Were there any other questions in the from the social media, Pauline? Okay. No, I mean, if there's anything I would like to ask, seeing how we have some time left, is, you know, many times when we've talked, Dr. Bone, we've always talked is more in a professional aspect. Being a parent who has a child with epilepsy, can you share with our supporters, you know, what it's been like to have to be not just a physician, but being a caregiver, the impact it has on families?
I think just talking generally, rather than specifically, I think that there are all sorts of issues in any family where there's epilepsy. There is, first of all, the fact that you have a child with a long-term condition who has siblings, and you've got to balance the psychosocial demands of all, and that is very difficult to do. That's one thing. The other thing in any young child with epilepsy is trying to explain to them what the condition is. There are now, thankfully, little books that you can read. There are even books that can be given out in primary or national primary school to other pupils in the class to let them know what their classmate has, what they're suffering from. But in the days gone by, people often concealed the diagnosis of epilepsy from their child's classmates for fear that their classmates and their classmates' parents would react in a negative.
He froze for a second. Hopefully he comes back on again in a moment. But I was going to say my own personal experience as a child, what Dr. Bone was saying is very, very true. My parents, both being self-employed, my father having an insurance company, was very afraid of clients finding out that I had epilepsy. Very much worried that there would be people who would not want to do business with my family. And I think the other thing that was extremely difficult, and I know my parents did it out of their own good, was really the social isolation. You know, you can't go certain places or do certain things because what if you have a seizure? And, you know, I know it was done out of love and concern, and I'm sure there's many people with epilepsy who can relate to what I'm saying now. But being socially isolated really had a very negative impact, because to go from being on your own, playing on your own, not being around many, to, okay, you're an adult now, you got to get a job, you got to go to school, you got to be productive in society, it's very scary. It causes a great amount of social anxiety because of those situations that we can't. How do you function? How do you go from one extreme to another? And it really, I can say myself as a person with epilepsy, as a business person with epilepsy, learning to adapt and having to communicate with others was very challenging at first, and it was almost a healing process, and learning to be comfortable being around people despite the challenges I was facing. But were there any other questions, Pauline? I don't want to just get off yet because I'm hoping that Dr. Bone will join us again.
We don't have any questions, but coming to what you said, I can really imagine how hard it would be. Connections.
Yeah.
Dr. Bone's connection is a little weak, but we're hoping he's going to join in soon.
Are you there, Dr. Bone?
I lost you. Did you lose me?
Yeah, your image froze. So, but no, as long as we can at least hear you, that's good. No, I was just saying to the supporters when we briefly lost you that, you know, what you were explaining about that balance it's very challenging because I was saying from my own personal experience, my father and mother being self-employed, they were very afraid of clients finding out about them having a chronically ill child, and how would they look at my father and mother? Would they still be capable of running a business, having to take care of me? And I faced a lot of social isolation as a child because there was always, well, we can't go out and do this, or you shouldn't be doing this because it could trigger a seizure. So I spent a lot of my childhood by myself. And then once becoming an adult, it was, well, you're grown up now, you need to get a job, you need to go to school, you need to do this. So to go from being isolated to right into society, it was very frightening, and it was a healing process to learn to be around others and communicate with others and be able to be part of society now.
Mm-hmm. I think another issue is the issue when it comes to the leaving home, if you like. And that again, if you have epilepsy in a child in the family, it's the uncertainty you have about leaving home if they go off to college or wherever they go to, and they go off on their own. And also whether they actually are now amongst people who understand what is wrong and know what to do if anything happens. So there are so many pitfalls. It is again very difficult.
It is. And I think myself, my children don't have epilepsy. My children have hemophilia. But myself, as having to be a caregiver to two children with a very rare chronic illness, even though we've made the advancements we have in treatment there, I mean, my children went from having a port and having to have prophylactic treatment on a regular basis to now the medication they're on, it's a shot every 2 weeks. I mean, it's taken so much weight off of our chest, because this May we took the boys home to meet my mother-in-law and father-in-law over in Udorf. We went to Germany for a few weeks, and so many people have said to me, well, why did it take so long for you to get your sons over to see where their father grew up? And I said, well, there was a point where my one son had to have daily treatment, and I don't even want to imagine how many containers of prophylactic treatment, how many needles, syringes, all these supplies. I pretty much would have had to pack up a cooler, and I'm just trying to think of getting through TSA with something like that and keeping my fingers crossed that they wouldn't lose it or anything. And then what if something happened when we were in Germany and he had to be hospitalized? I mean, thank goodness with the healthcare system over there, if we had to pay anything out of pocket, thankfully it wouldn't put us in severe financial distress. But just the thought of being on the other side of the world and an emergency taking place, I couldn't go through with it, where now both have had their ports removed and they have this one treatment. So all I had to do now was put together a little first aid box and put their medicine, a couple ice packs and supplies in there, and I could just take it out and put it in the container. So when it went through TSA, they just took it, opened it, saw it was medicine, closed it back up, and handed it right back. I mean, it was just a totally different situation.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's an understandable thing when you have a child with a life-threatening chronic illness, because it comes down to the uncertainty. And I mean, as well as my sons are doing, I know in 8 years, when my oldest is 18, he's already told me he wants to be a paleontologist, he wants to go to school, and I know he's not going to stay anywhere near here. It's a little nerve-wracking. I know he'll do fine, I'm confident he'll do fine, but the first thought of, if he has a joint bleed, can I get there in time? Can I do what I need to do to make sure he's okay? That still sits in the back of my mind, I won't lie. And I think it's like that for any parent who has a child with a chronic illness.
Absolutely, yeah.
Pauline, did you want to contribute anything? We have about 10 minutes left.
I think I lost you guys.
Did you lose us? Oh, okay. Are you still there?
Yes, I'm right.
Okay, I was just saying, we have 10 minutes left. Is there anything you would like to contribute before we end?
So I would just like to ask you, Natalie, since we've talked a lot about, I just have a couple of questions. So you were saying about how it is to be isolated from our peers for a long time because our parents try to protect us, from all the harm that we could go through. So growing up isolated and all of a sudden when you're exposed to, finding a job, to going off to college. So the mental health, how do you deal with the social anxiety and all that? Are there specific mental health specialists who can help in such situations, or how did you fight that kind of social anxiety to emerge as who you are right now?
I don't know if there's any mental health professionals that focus specifically on it. When I went to a psychologist, I was under cognitive therapy, so really it was trying to relax myself and be able to prepare myself for going into the situation. I think some of the things I had to remind myself that even today it's still hard is being able to make eye contact and feel comfortable. There was many times when I would be around people, I would tense up and I would look down and away, and obviously some people found it rude, thinking, why isn't she looking at me while I'm talking to her? But at the same time, I was so scared. It was the only way I could keep myself calm and keep myself in the conversation. As I got older, and especially once I decided to do what I'm doing now, I had to tell myself, if you're going to come off as a business person, talking to the floor isn't going to get you anywhere. No one's going to take you seriously. And it was even something as simple as having to stand in front of a mirror and look at my image and pretend that person was, that was someone else, and just work through and do my own therapy to get past those things.
Okay.
I was going to say that the problem with epilepsy, whether it's a consequence of the way society treats people with epilepsy, or whether it's part of the condition itself, but anxiety and depression are very, very common indeed. Very common. And if you like, the ideal epilepsy centre should incorporate someone who gives psychological or psychiatric support to people with long-term epilepsy. In the United Kingdom, there are one or two psychologists and psychiatrists who do specialise in epilepsy management, but they're very few and far between. And one of the difficulties with, for instance, treating depression and epilepsy is using drugs that can potentially increase the number of seizures. So there's uncertainty about that, but there's always been this theoretical risk that some of the antidepressant drugs could actually make seizures more active. So managing depression, managing anxiety and epilepsy is difficult and does often require specialist input. And the other thing in epilepsy is a consequence of depression and anxiety is the high suicide rate. We all know about suicide. We all know that people can have sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. But also we know for all of the epilepsies, and especially for complex partial epilepsies, the incidence of suicide is much higher than it is in the general population. So there's obviously a psychosocial need that is not being met in people with epilepsy, that things might come to that.
No, absolutely. And one thing that makes me, it's sad but happy at the same time is, and I remember you sent it to me, Dr. Bone, about the study in suicide that they did over here. For the longest time, other organizations were saying it was 2.5 to 5 times more likely somebody with epilepsy could commit suicide. And what this study found that they published in 2016, they gathered information from 2003 to 2010 in 17 states. It's actually 22 times more likely, and the biggest age range is 40 to 49, which really, it doesn't surprise me because, I've had this since the age of 2, but I try to envision myself, okay, let's say I lived a normal life and in my early 40s, started having seizures, and I lost my job, I lost my car, I was about to lose my apartment or home, everything was falling apart. I can see very easily with the lack of services we have for people with epilepsy here in the U.S. and with the way our system is when it comes to disability. Epilepsy is one of the hardest to prove to get disability for, unless it's a very severe form and it's visibly obvious that something is not right. A lot of people wait years to get help. And when you're in a situation where you're responsible for you and don't have family or services to fall back on, many people, when they realize I'm going homeless from this, take their life. It's just too painful and too fearful to continue for many. And I think it's something that we need to address. And I really liked how you brought up the fact of the challenges of trying to take care of people who have anxiety and depression, but also epilepsy, because many of these medications that treat epilepsy, it's suppressing the central nervous system. But then when you deal with depression, they're giving people medication to increase their serotonin levels. So here you are suppressing the brain, but trying to uplift the brain at the same time. And I can see how very easily, for some people, that could trigger a seizure.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I would like to thank Dr. Bone for joining us today. Again, his book, Sacred Lives, is on Amazon. I encourage everyone to purchase a copy today. If you can today, please show support by clicking on the Super Thanks button below and making a donation, or go to our website at www.defeatingepilepsy.org and click on the Donate button. Your contribution makes our programs and services possible. Like and subscribe today to our channel and click on the bell to see future videos. Thank you again for your support, and together we will defeat epilepsy.